Throughout the war, German U-boats would sink millions of tons of shipping, especially along the crucial North America route in the Atlantic.
World War II had massive land battles, huge air raids, and famous invasions. But one of its most important battles didn't happen on land at all. It happened at sea, where ships were sinking fast and Britain was running out of time. So how did the Allies turn things around? And what tactics finally stopped the U-boats before it was too late? This is how the Battle of the Atlantic was really won. In September 1939, just hours after Britain declared war on Germany, the fight had already begun out at sea. Just days later, the aircraft carrier HMS Courageous was sunk by U-29. Then came the loss of the battleship HMS Royal Oak at Scapa Flow. Over 800 men died in a single night. But those high-profile targets were just the beginning. Germany's real strategy was much colder. Choke off Britain's merchant shipping. Germany wasted no time going after Britain's greatest vulnerability, its reliance on overseas supplies. Food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials all came by sea. Cut that off, and you could slowly choke the island into submission. Admiral Karl Donitz had a strategy built around exactly that. He called it the Tonnage War. The goal was simple and ruthless: sink merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them. This wasn't a brand new idea either. During World War I, Germany had already come close to pulling it off. In 1917 alone, U-boats sank nearly 900,000 tons of Allied shipping in just 1 month. Britain's supplies got so low, they were down to only 6 weeks of essentials. And the submarines back then were nowhere near as advanced: small, clunky, and often unreliable. But they proved one thing beyond doubt: if you could control the seas, you could bring Britain to its knees. Germany learned that lesson early, and they never forgot it. Even though the Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from building submarines after World War I, they didn't stop planning. They just kept it quiet. German naval officers worked in secret with foreign shipbuilders, using fake companies to test out new designs in places like Spain and the Netherlands. At the same time, they began training a new generation of U-boat commanders. So when Hitler officially restarted Germany's military buildup in 1935, the Navy was already way ahead. They had a submarine school set up in Kiel, and parts were being smuggled back into the country. Within months of signing a naval agreement with Britain, Germany unveiled a fresh batch of fully operational U-boats, ready for war. By the time the war broke out in 1939, Germany didn't have a massive submarine force, just 39 U-boats, but they packed a serious punch. The Allies weren't prepared. Merchant ships often sailed alone or in loose groups, and anti-submarine tactics hadn't changed much since World War I. The Royal Navy remained focused on enemy battleships. As a result, older ships were assigned to convoy duty, even though they weren't equipped to handle submarines. By early 1940, German U-boats were making the most of these weaknesses. They started targeting major ports along Britain's south and east coasts like London, Hull, and Southampton. The attacks got so bad that Britain had to shift much of its shipping to the west, using ports like Liverpool and Clyde instead. This helped avoid air raids, but it didn't stop the U-boats. These new routes passed straight through waters the Germans were already patrolling, and after France fell in the summer of 1940, things got even worse. Now the Germans could launch U-boats from bases along the French Atlantic coast, which meant they could stay out longer and cover a lot more ocean. From mid-1940 to early 1941, German U-boat crews were having what they proudly called the first happy time. And for good reason. It felt like they owned the Atlantic. Convoys were lightly defended, aircraft couldn't reach far enough to protect them, and Allied codebreakers were still trying to catch up. In just a few months, German subs sank more than 270 ships. Convoys like SC-7 and HX-79 were torn apart by coordinated U-boat attacks. These early wolf packs, led by commanders like Otto Kretschmer on U-99, could strike multiple ships over a single night. In just one attack, 20 out of 35 ships in SC-7 were lost. The Allies simply weren't ready. It was open season. For Donitz, who had served on submarines during the First World War, This was proof that his plan could work. He believed that with 300 U-boats, he could cut Britain off completely, and even though he didn't have that many yet, the results were already piling up. But on the British side, the situation was becoming desperate. By early 1941, the pace of shipping losses was unsustainable. If these didn't change, the country would run out of ships, and fast. New vessels were being built, but not quickly enough to replace what was going down. That spring, Winston Churchill made it official. He called the fight for control of the Atlantic the most important battle of the war and named it accordingly. The Battle of the Atlantic. He set up a special cabinet group to deal with it, and their job was clear: fix the strategy, boost escort ship production, and get the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force working better together. Two key breakthroughs came soon after. First, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park cracked the German naval Enigma codes for the first time in 1941. This allowed Allied convoys to be rerouted around known wolf packs. Second, the US agreed to the destroyers for bases deal, sending 50 old destroyers to the Royal Navy, badly needed stopgaps while more ships were built. Meanwhile, the Lend-Lease Act ramped up US aid to Britain in the form of food, weapons, and merchant vessels. At that point, the Royal Navy was already using an early kind of sonar called ASDIC. It could bounce sound waves off submarines to detect them underwater, but only if the sub was directly ahead. And that was a problem. German U-boats often attacked at night while traveling on the surface, where ASDIC couldn't spot them. Even when sonar worked, getting a kill was tough. Depth charges had to land almost directly on top of the sub to be effective. But U-boats could dive quickly, change direction, and slip away before anyone had a chance to hit them. The system had potential, but it wasn't enough on its own. At the same time, the Royal Navy brought in a new kind of escort ship called the Flower-Class Corvette. These ships were small and slow, and life on board was tough, but they were strong and could carry depth charges to fight submarines. They were easy to build and became the main line of defense for Allied convoys. Crews had to deal with rough seas and freezing temperatures, but these ships helped keep supply lines open. Soon, even better escort ships joined in, like American destroyer escorts and British frigates. By 1942, convoys had more protection than ever before. But the middle of the Atlantic was still a big problem. Planes couldn't fly that far, so this area became known as the Black Pit. With no air cover, U-boats hid in this zone and waited to attack. Then things got worse. After the US joined the war in 1941, German U-boats moved to the American coast. The US hadn't set up a convoy system yet, and cities along the coast kept their lights on at night. Ships sailed alone, making them easy targets. The U-boats took full advantage, sinking over 860 ships in just 8 months. It was one of the worst periods for Allied losses. Some of the damage was invisible but devastating. Between January and June of 1942, the US lost 22% of its bauxite transport ships, critical for building aircraft. American air production estimates were cut from 60,000 to 48,000 planes. In other words, Germany sank thousands of Allied aircraft before they were even built. Once again, the German crews called it their happy time, but this one wouldn't last either. The Allies were watching, and they were getting smarter. By late 1942, the US finally started using convoy systems, and it made a big difference. Ship losses dropped quickly. At the same time, Canada's Navy was growing fast. They added more escort ships and began protecting more of the Atlantic routes. In the air, the Allies were also getting stronger. Coastal commands started using long-range planes like the Sunderland, Catalina, and later the B-24 Liberator. These aircraft could fly far over the ocean and attack submarines before they got too close. When the Allies added the Lee Light, a powerful spotlight used during night missions, it became even harder for U-boats to hide. But Germany wasn't finished yet. In early 1943, Karl Donitz took full control of the German Navy and put everything into the submarine campaign. He had over 300 U-boats in action, many working in packs. They were reading intercepted British naval codes, and the Central Atlantic, still without air cover, gave them a huge advantage. March 1943 saw 700,000 tons of shipping sunk, the worst month of the entire campaign. British leaders were deeply worried. One internal report said they might have to send convoys directly through U-boat attacks with no way around. That sudden rise in sinkings during March 1943 might have looked like a German win, but underneath, things were changing fast. Allied forces were finally working as one solid team. Escort ships weren't guessing anymore. They moved in groups, stayed in contact with aircraft, and relied on secret Enigma intel from Ultra to dodge danger. They also had Huff Duff, a radio tracking tool that let them find U-boats just by picking up their signals. So whenever a convoy was under threat, backup could be sent quickly, catching U-boats off guard. More importantly, the Allies were building ships faster than the Germans could sink them. A key part of this effort was the Liberty ship. These cargo ships were cheap, fast to build and designed for mass production. By late 1942, U.S. shipyards were turning out Liberty ships in under 60 days, some in less than 5. In 1943 alone, the U.S. produced 19.2 million tons of merchant shipping, more than all U-boat sinkings combined during the entire war. In early 1943, for every cargo ship that went down, 2 more were built. The balance had switched. The Allies were no longer just defending, they were going on after the U-boats. In February, they launched Operation Derange, an aggressive air campaign targeting U-boats as they departed from French ports into the Bay of Biscay. It was risky because German planes still covered the area, but it forced U-boats to stay underwater longer. That means they moved slower and had to resurface more often. At the same time, the Allies set up new air bases in Iceland, Greenland, and later Azores. These helped close the last open stretch of ocean. By May, even the middle of the Atlantic was under watch from the skies. Everything was finally working for the Allies. Convoys had better protection with escort carriers sailing beside them. Radar and sonar were more accurate. New weapons like Hedgehog and Squid gave escort ships a better way to attack submarines. Long-range bombers flew patrols over the ocean, even in areas that were once too far to reach. And with codebreakers reading German messages through Ultra, commanders knew where U-boats were hiding and could plan ahead. Then came May 1943. In just 1 month, Germany lost 41 U-boats. It was a huge blow. Many crews were inexperienced and it showed. A German officer later called it Black May because the losses were too big to ignore. The U-boats were sinking fewer ships and losing more of their own. The numbers were no longer in their favor. Donitz realized the campaign had failed. The human cost was staggering. Over 46,000 Allied merchant sailors died during the Battle of the Atlantic. Many burned alive or drowned in freezing waters. For the Germans, it was even worse. Out of 40,000 U-boat crewmen, 28,000 never returned home. That's a death rate of over 70,000, the highest of any military branch in the entire war. He told his submarines to pull out of the North Atlantic. He hoped it would just be for a short time, but the U-boats never came back strong again. Their control over the sea was finished. From then on, the Atlantic was in Allied hands. Britain was no longer cut off. Supplies flowed freely, and now, with control of the ocean, the Allies could start planning the next big step, liberating Europe. What do you think? Was the defeat of the U-boats the true turning point of the war? Or could Germany have turned the tide if they acted faster? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.